Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today's Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. Welcome. Tonight's format is an open forum. So any questions you have or topics you'd like me to speak on, feel free to submit those. Historically, we've talked about this as an opportunity to invite your family and friends, extended family, even siblings. They can ask questions. You can share this link with them, but you can also ask questions for and on behalf of them or about them. If you have a question that you get asked by somebody in your family and you want to hear how I would answer the question, you're welcome to pass that on. If you are not a parent or a primary caregiver, you might be a grandparent. If you're not a primary parent of our program, please let me know your age and relationship to the client that you're asking about. That gives me some sense about how exactly to answer the question. Make sure I'm speaking to the audience correctly. So, with that, we have 5 pre-submitted questions. You can also submit questions at any time live. So, without any further ado, I'm going to get into the pre-submitted questions. Somebody writes this: How to talk to my teenage son about school shootings? What should I discuss with him? Any suggestions on how to guide my son in feeling safe at school? Also, how as a parent can I feel safe sending my teen to a high school when I am fearful of a potential school shooting? Years ago in elementary school, second grade, there was an active mass shooter at a business near his school, and the gunman took off and went through the school campus, and the kids had to do the active shooter response, and were told it was not a drill. My then young son said he was so scared as they put the tables and chairs in front of the classroom door and closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and then they had to hide for about an hour. When they came out of hiding, the school was flooded with cop cars, and that was also very scary for my son. Shootings have become a real part of life. How to best support our children and ourselves. I hate that I have to answer this question, meaning that I wish this wasn't the reality because it's such a simple and innocent thing to send your child to school. And the fact that we have to deal with these things is really heartbreaking for me. But first and foremost, what I would say about this is you've got to separate out your trauma from his. One of the things that we talk about when dealing with trauma or stress that impacts a whole family, like the loss of a family member, for example, that everybody experiences, the grief is that not everybody is grieving or feeling or responding to trauma in the same way. And it's very difficult, in some ways, you might say impossible, to be there for somebody to the extent you haven't healed your own trauma. So I would say, first and foremost, make sure that you're telling this story to a therapist or to somebody that can hold that space for you, help you to work through it. It doesn't matter what I say. If you don't do that part of it, there'll be no clarity in terms of who you're taking care of and who you're responding to. His fears will mix in and conflate with your fears, and you'll be attempting to soothe your own trauma, which might be dismissive of his trauma. So, the first thing, in fact, this kind of speaks to most of the parent education that I do is you've got to take care of yourself first. So go to a therapist, either somebody that feels comfortable working with this issue or somebody that specializes in dealing with trauma, and most importantly, tell the story. Tell the story over and over again until you feel like you are grounded, you're safe in your response, and you can be there for somebody else. And the second thing is really to either provide for him if you can, if you've unraveled your own trauma first, provide for him the same kind of safe context that I just encourage you to seek out, or offer him to go to a therapist himself. That's the most important thing. If you are grounded, you have a base from which to operate where you can be there for other people. If you still have a trauma response, right? You still have unresolved, unprocessed trauma. It doesn't matter what skills that you will use. And the key ingredient really in processing trauma is the task of telling the story over and over again. Every aspect, every thought, every feeling. Doesn't matter if we're talking about EMDR or brain spotting or any of the other evidence-based practices. They all involve, virtually without variation, some version of telling the story over and over again. Sometimes you tell the story multiple times in a session, and you might even be asked to listen to a tape of you telling the story later on after the session. So to be able to hold that space, listen to somebody. I'm not really asking you to be the therapist, but that's always the first thought I have when people ask about what do I say to a child. 9 times out of 10, it's about what you can hear from the child. You know, the greatest, even as a therapist, you know, I do a lot of psychoeducation. This podcast is psychoeducation and teaching and parent education and skill building and relationship tools. That's what I do on here. This is not therapy. It can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy, because therapy involves principally listening to a safe, compassionate, non-judgmental, patient, capable other person. So the task would be to listen to him talk about it, to hear his story. You know, when you get into more advanced techniques like reframing the experience, right? The problem with any technique that is designed to remove or resolve the trauma, if it comes from a parent or somebody who has a dog in the fight, meaning you want your child to be regulated, you want your child to be healed, you're going to move to that too quickly. So, to be able to practice the kind of detachment required to be able to be there for somebody else, oftentimes it's best suited for somebody else. I consider myself an adequate therapist much of the time, and I'm not a therapist for my children. I'm not a therapist for my wife. Every single member of my family has their own therapist. And when I'm unavailable or not capable of listening or holding space for them, I know that they have that person that they can go to. And that goes from my youngest child of 4 to my oldest child to my wife and I. So it's really about listening. It's really about holding space. The techniques or tools to kind of resolve the trauma can be, um, they'll come in too early if you're anxious. They'll come in too early if you're not resolved, if you're not grounded. And what the person will feel on the other end of that exchange is dismissed. It'll actually prevent the resolution of the trauma. You know, there's no way in this life to escape pain. There's just no way to escape it. The only way to escape it is to, I suppose, anesthetize yourself with drugs until you die, right? Right? Just take up take up opiates or take up heroin or alcohol and just medicate yourself to not feel. That's the only way that I know not to feel pain and sadness and grief and loss. So the goal isn't to not have them feel the tragedy of the experience that you're describing in your question. The goal is to help them feel it, right? The only way to resolve grief is to feel the grief. The only way to resolve pain is to feel the pain, the sadness, the hurt, the fear. And you need somebody that's regulated. And oftentimes the advantage that professionals or sponsors or people outside of the family have is that kind of natural detachment. So, listening, hearing, resolving yourself. I wrote something the other day. I was thinking about this. I was actually watching the show Queer Eye for the Queer Eye, I guess is the name of it. My wife was watching it, and I was in the background, and I was recognizing that these 5 men, LGBTQ identifying men, one non-binary, have gone through for in many ways really a traumatic life, a place where they didn't feel welcomed and seen. They really became acutely aware of what is needed to help someone heal, to feel welcome, to be themselves. And that's why, if you've seen the show, it's a tearjerker every episode that I watch, no matter how I try to distance myself from it by pointing out how overproduced it is and how contrived some of it is. I still end up with some tears in my eyes at some point. These men are able to give people that are much different than them a transformative experience, because they give to those people what they needed when they were suffering, when they didn't feel like that they fit in, when they didn't feel heard or seen. And it came to me, and I thought, that's really what I do as a therapist. is when I'm meeting somebody who's feeling something distressing or uncomfortable, I think, what do they need? What did I need when I was suffering and wanted a way through it? And what I needed was somebody who could sit with me, who could who was regulated, meaning that their nervous system was at a nice, comfortable, regulated baseline. Somebody that could listen, ask questions, not move too quickly to solutions, not try to fix things, not try to brush over things, but really deeply understand me. And so that's really what you when you're doing your own work as a parent, you become aware of what your children or what other people need. That's why so many people in the helping professions, those that have some talent in it, if you will, have been on the other side of the equation in their life and explored it and looked at it. And to the extent that they've moved through or healed their pain, their trauma, they then know what other people need because they just think, yeah, I wrote this yesterday. What do I need when I'm suffering? Without exception, it brings me back to love, patience, non-judgment, compassion, and understanding. So, like often, do your work. A container has to be bigger than the contained. So that means you have to be a step ahead of the person that you're containing. You can only take somebody as far as you've come. And so you need to figure out because that's a parent trauma too, right? We're dealing with parental stress. You can't escape pain, but you can become an agent for healing by allowing people to heal it. The biggest thing that I learned as a young therapist is I thought, because I had been told as a young person that I was good at helping people feel good. Basically, I was good at giving ideas or advice or problem solving. I thought I was going to help people not feel their pain, not feel pain, feel happy. And what I realized, of course, is that the job of a healer, of a therapist, is actually to help people feel pain. Not to oversimplify it, but in essence, the young people that are in our program, the parents that come to our intensives, the folks that come to Evoke for therapy and for healing are here to learn to feel and move through their pain, their sadness, their trauma, their grief, their loss, their hurt. And to be able to do that, they've got to have somebody, a guide, a support, some other who can sit with them with enough perspective, enough self regulation to be able to hold space for them. That just simply means to listen, to understand, to ask questions, to be curious, to welcome whatever the person is saying without the energy of trying to get over it. Even though people will frame that energy of trying to make someone feel happy, they will want to frame it as love and kindness. It's just a lack of awareness, right? It's just a lack of awareness, at least, and maybe a lack of skills. So do your work, get your healing, make sure you're grounded, and then do the same thing for your child or offer them to get help from somebody outside of the home. Thanks for the question. Tough question, but great question. Somebody asks, how does one compassionately suggest a teen reach out to their old good friends, understanding that good is loaded, but the kids that are not struggling as much as the but kids who are not struggling as much as the less than ideal peers? I don't know that I would encourage you to encourage a child to reach out to their old friends. The closest that I would encourage you in this example, or for most parents or people, the closest to advice that I would encourage you to try is to say something like, "This is what's worked for me." I mean, if you go to a 12-step meeting or support group, that's the language you're going to hear. This is what worked for me. It might not work for you. This is what I found. And the second point that I would want to make with this is you really don't have to encourage them. The people gravitate toward people that they can connect to. And sometimes, the question is, why are they attracted to the peers that they're attracted to? That's the question. And I don't know all of the answers to that question because they could vary as with as many people as there are being asked. But in essence, because they feel accepted somewhat, because it feels easier. And even if your child has done some work and is kind of on the path to healing and to growing, most often they're going to be drawn to people that are either struggling or people that have struggled significantly and have healed in similar ways. So share what works for you, but don't assume you know what works for them. I don't want to be too, this will sound strange, especially to newcomers, but it's true. You don't know what they need to do. What might work for you might not work for them, right? I'm really an introvert. And so when people make suggestions to me that involve a lot of extroversion, it doesn't really work for me. And what I've learned in the process of becoming myself these 53 years, what I've learned from that process is that I have to figure it out myself. And so do my children. So I would be I would make the invitation or the suggestion, which is a really strong word, suggestion. I would make it gentle. I would make it more in in a way about talking about yourself and what works and acknowledging that it might not work for them. And I don't think they need to be told. When I was 17 and I decided to get off drugs and to go back to school and do what I need to do in life to make a better life for myself, not a single person needed to tell me that I couldn't hang around my old friends. I figured that out instantly. With some experimentation. When I left a drug rehab when I was 17, I had a small desire to at least prove my parents and the professionals wrong. And so my idea was I'm going to hang around my peers and not use. And then, compromise after compromise, I was right back into the same pattern. But the minute that I was ready to stop, I knew, it was self evident to me what they talk about and teach in 12-step groups, which is you have to change your playground and your playmates. People figure out that are sober whether or not they can go to a bar with friends or be around people that are drinking. Again, they go to meetings where others say, "Here's what's worked for me. I needed to find my own safe place. I need to find my tribe." That was for me. I think we impose on our children, we project on our children so much of ourselves, so much of our own life, so much of our way of thinking, our way of being, what's worked for us, that we really do miss them. We miss connecting to them. And the audacity to be you. And at one point, I stealing from somebody else who told me this, suggested that in order to understand somebody, you have to lose your mind. And it was just a playful way of saying, you have to stop thinking that you know the answers. I remember when my therapist said to me about 10 years ago during one session, I don't know what I was asking about, but she said, you don't know somebody else's truth. We don't know somebody else's truth. Don't give your children self-help books unless they ask. And even when they ask, slow it down. Don't give your children or your friends advice unless they ask. And even when they ask, slow it down. See, the shift, what if you're a listener to this broadcast, a watcher of this broadcast, a participant in our program, a listener to the podcast, what you've heard is that we think of mental health differently than others. We think it's primarily about becoming our most authentic self, who we are. And with that comes love and compassion and wisdom and humility and courage and clarity and groundedness, and the list goes on. Right? That we don't think of it at Evoke. I don't think of it as being good or getting it right, getting the right answer. So the idea of advice doesn't fit into this paradigm. I said to you, my children look to me. I'm very close to my children. We have a great time. We spend a lot of time together. We're very connected. I don't give them advice, even when they ask, because I don't know the answer. The closest thing that I do is they'll come to me asking a question about love or relationships or work, and I'll say, "Here's what worked for me. You might try this. This could work. I've seen it work, and it might not." Because fundamentally, I'm thinking in terms of I want them to become themselves. I want them. I really do. I said this to my youngest the other day. Like, I expect you to expand beyond me as you grow. I expect that I was talking to my daughter about the gift, my youngest, about the gift that she has at understanding psychological concepts. And I was saying, look, you might not like this. We've talked about it before. You might not want to become a therapist. I get that. If you chose to, you'll be amazing at it. You'll be better than me, better than your older sister. I really believe that. My daughter said something really profound. She said, "Uh, I do want to take what you're describing in me." She said, I want to take what you're describing, but I want to express it through art. And I said, that makes all the sense in the world. I have a son who's an artist, my second born who's an artist, my third born is an artist. And art is often a way of expressing and healing and communicating the same kinds of principles. Music, visual art, performance art is a way of expressing it. Artists are often on the. I was talking to a friend just recently, and we were talking about how some artists in the 70s and 80s were saying things that today is now mainstream in the mainstream ideas. And I was saying art is always ahead, right? It's always pushing the limits and the boundaries. Somebody writes this: I continue to have a confusing experience with my significant other. I will attempt to share things that are hurting me in our relationship with her, and I do it by mostly using the I feel statement format. Oftentimes I get an almost immediate response from her saying, "Well, that is actually what's happening to me." And I then feel like my emotions are neglected and dismissed, and the focus is redirected to her struggle. I generally get frustrated and would like to try practicing a different response. Any suggestions would be appreciated. What a fantastic question that I can't imagine many people not relating to that. This might have come out of the last broadcast I did, which was about couples relationships and specifically about intimacy and betrayal. If both of you are hurting, neither of you are going to be able to listen in the most effective ways. And so all that tells me in that moment when you're doing that is that your wife is not feeling heard and held. That's not an indictment on you by any means. It's just that's where she's at. She in that moment, was it a wife? Am I saying that right? A significant other, maybe it's a partner, your partner. She is not capable in that moment of listening. And as I explained the other night, if you haven't listened to the podcast, I would encourage you to do so. The listener is the giver. Energy comes out of the listener. The talker is the taker. The person sharing is asking and taking energy from the listener. We don't know that. We haven't been taught that. Nobody taught me that. Just kind of figured it out by watching. But after I figured it out, it's self-evident. That's why at the end of a difficult exchange where one person is expressing a lot of feelings, they'll feel invigorated and empowered and even closer to the person that they're sharing with. The person on the receiving end, especially if those feelings are toward them. But if the feelings are heavy in general, even if they're not towards them, they can still have the same experience. They'll feel distant. they'll feel a little bit wounded or sensitive. They'll need time and they'll need space. That's because they've been giving. When you know that the listener is the giver, everything makes sense then. Then you understand why it's so hard after a difficult discussion when one person is shared to find closeness again, because the person that's been the receiver, been the container, been the holder, they need time and space to re-energize. That's why I've learned in my marriage after a while that when there's an exchange between my wife and I, if I'm the talker, but the primary talker, I've got to give her space. And vice versa, when she's the primary talker and she wants to get reassurance. That's the difficult thing that happens the second stage is if I share and she withdraws even a little bit. I'm not talking about punishing or being passive aggressive. I'm just talking about gets quiet, takes a little bit of space. Now, because I feel insecure because I've exposed myself and shared things, I want her to take care of me, right? So I ask her questions like, what are you thinking? What's going on? Are you okay? Why are you walking away? But those were unfair and unwise because it takes psychological energy to hold space for somebody. That's why adequate parenting is so exhausting. That's why relationships are so exhausting because of that energy. So what the small exchange that you described tells me is that she wasn't ready. And so you both have to kind of learn to take turns. Learn when you have the capacity. There's a story in my chapter 5 in The Audacity to Be You, where I describe my wife coming in this office to share some things with me, and I won't retell the whole story, but it illustrates what 20 years of therapy gave us in terms of tools and insights about how to manage listening and sharing and boundaries and self-care and energy and so forth. So all that exchange tells me is that your wife isn't, or your partner, excuse me, your significant other is not capable in that moment. That means you have to have other people to go to, sponsors, a close friend that is trustworthy, a therapist, a journal. Some people can meditate, some people can pray, but you have to have other sources because no individual person in a partnership is going to be always capable. And it's really critical for both of you to understand the taking and the giving aspect in the talking and the listening, so that you own when you're not capable, when you don't have the energy. You can walk away before it escalates. You don't set up the other person to fail and say, yeah, tell me how you're feeling. Because see, you're managing triggers when you're listening. The containing is as much about kind of holding momentarily at bay your reactions, your triggers, the things you want to say, come back, clarify, whatever it is. You're managing it over here for the time being. And that takes energy to hold that down. These things are true. I think they're once I learned them, they're self-evident. I've never shared this with somebody where they said that's not my experience ever. It is the nature, the anatomy of a relationship, of a partnership, of a marriage. So it's just about learning where you're at, learning your capacity, owning it, understanding taking and giving, making sure you have other sources of support, because the mistake that many people make, that I made the first half of our marriage, was that she was to be my everything and I was to be hers. Because if I'm going to get my needs met with my therapist or with my trusted friend over here, why be married to her? Right? That's the whole reason I thought I was to be married, is to be best friends and to be everything to her and have her be everything to me. That's just nonsense. That's just romantic folklore. That's just a twisted idea that has come up in our culture that parades around in the costume of intimacy and closeness and partnership. That's not at all that. That's why the great thinkers like Khalil Gibran uses phrases like, let there be space in your togetherness. That's why we learned that healthy detachment is healthy attachment. So thank you for the question. Great one. I think everybody can relate to. Somebody asks, what do you recommend when your 16-year-old child who has been in a therapeutic boarding school comes for his first home visit after over a year away, but now refuses to return? He went to Evoke and worked with one of our therapists for 10 weeks and has been at the school for 11 months. We've had several local visits prior to his home visits. Now he's home, not enrolled in any school nor in any therapy. He cannot return to his current school unless he's willing. We haven't had any advice from the educational consultant. Whew, that's a tough one. You know, anytime I get asked a question about parents about what to do, I want to acknowledge something right here and right now, which is the nuclear option is always available to you. You know, I'm not going to go there immediately, right? Where you pull the nuclear switch, if you will, and say, I'm going to hire transport agents back and take him back to a wilderness program, back to Evoke, or back to a school that will take him even if he doesn't want to go. That's always available to you if you have the time, if you have the resources. I'll just acknowledge that. Because when I start talking about things that you can do, people say, well, what if he doesn't respond? What if he doesn't respond? And the answer is there's always the nuclear option when there is the nuclear option available. It's, your story is a little bit even triggering to me in the sense that there's got to be some discussion about this. Like, a boundary is a boundary. I know you know that. That's why you're asking the question. You're bringing it to kind of a critical nexus, right? A critical decision, which is this is the way we're going to live. I mean, that's in essence one of the fundamental reasons I'm sure why he was placed in a wilderness program in the first place is because boundaries weren't respected. So some kind of dialogue, some kind of family therapy, some kind of clear statement about, I won't live this way. This is just one decision, but it's emblematic of a way of living that I can't live anymore. The only thing I can think to tell you is not just an educational consultant, because when you go to an educational consultant, you're asking for advice, which is fine. I believe in them. I used one myself for my family. So I believe in the role, but you got to go to a therapist or a parent coach and kind of talk your way through it. Where are you at? What's your disposal? Is this symptomatic of something else that can be resolved without using the nuclear option? Is there some way to get past this impasse where he'll realize that going back is, the best decision for the family, for you and for him? And so I think the reason why an education consultant yours might not give advice on this topic is because you have to think your way through it. You really do. If you were my client, we would have a discussion about this. It'd probably take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 sessions. I might encourage you or invite you to do a family session or to meet with your son individually to find out where he's at. I'm sorry that he's at a spot where you might have to go back to a kind of decision that you had made in the past that you hoped you would not have to make again. And that might be the case. I don't know. So it's a very difficult dilemma situation. But the energy, in my mind, is essentially to your son, this isn't working. This won't work for me. I can't do this. And then get some outside help. Your therapist, your coach, or a family therapist. Ask your son to visit with the family therapist or even with your therapist or your parent coach so they can have some ideas, and then talk your way through the thinking. And you might have to make another tough decision, and you might not. You might be able to find a way to unstick the seemingly stuck situation, the puzzle pieces, through some kind of process. Somebody writes this. Oh, This is a two-parter. Dehydrated today. Somebody writes, our 15-year-old son was at Evoke for 3 months and is now at a therapeutic boarding school for 9 months. At about 10, he started taking things like a baseball hat from a friend, markers from school, and a credit card left on a desk, books at the book fair. At his therapeutic boarding school, he's received consequences for taking oranges, chips, things lying around that he has wanted. He came home at Christmas for a home visit for 4 days. We noticed he had 3 T-shirts that were not his. He said that the guys shared. After he left to go back to school, we found the 3 shirts hidden in the guest room closet. We've gotten curious, listened to him, and looked deeper as to the why. After talking to him, we learned that he understands it is wrong. He says he is doing it impulsively. Impulsively because he wants it. This has broken a major boundary for us. Dishonesty and stealing continued in the next bubble. We are reporting it to the school. Great. Sending the shirts back. Excellent. Our hope is to put the issue back on him. We are struggling with the what next. We have actually discussed notifying the police and reporting it, as crazy as that sounds. Incarceration sounds a little crazy for 3 T-shirts, but obviously this is not going to be the correct direction. Can you speak to how to handle the stealing and mental illness in general and finding the sweet spot for accountability versus punishment? How to move the ball in a therapeutic, constructive manner while still putting it back on him? Is there any recent study on the issue of stealing and what we know? I don't know. To answer the last question first, I don't know of any recent studies on stealing. First of all, your thought process is fairly sophisticated already. I mean, you're already you must be doing your work a lot, because the way you're thinking about it, the way that you responded, the way that you included the school, the way that you wanted to look at the mental health lens versus just the behavioral lens. I think all of that is exactly the kinds of things that I would coach. You know, I won't go too far astray from your question, but sometimes I'm asked questions like this, or I hear myself quoted. I've heard myself quoted, both, people trying to quote me literally and also hypothetically. And sometimes when I hear myself quoted hypothetically, or when people attempt to do it, it's not exactly what I would say, because what I would say is you have to do what you need to do. I know this is a question and answer. I know during question and answers, I'm going to be asked questions about what people might do. So I know that that's the setup. I get that. But as I've said many times, it's really not about what you do. In the opening of the journey of the rogue parent, the main shift was shifting the question from what should I do to who am I, who is my child, what's my relationship to them, and what's my relationship to their issues. And out of those explorations, out of those questions, out of those answers, come the truth. The right decision, calling the police won't solve anything, and not calling the police won't solve anything. I was just telling somebody recently, and you've heard me say this on the podcast, getting divorced won't solve anything, and staying married won't solve anything. Kicking your 22-year-old drug using, video game playing child out of the home at 22 doesn't solve anything, or letting him stay there doesn't solve anything, because that's not the problem, right? The problem is in here, right? The problem is in our thinking, our codependency, our lack of detachment, our lack of insight and awareness about what connection is, our trauma that's unprocessed, our healing that's left to be done. And so I don't know what to do. I'm not inclined to call the cops in a situation like this, but I get it. I wouldn't fault you for doing it. It's a fair, natural consequence for his actions. It might be the only thing that he does. My youngest, sometime in the last year, had an issue with taking something that wasn't hers from a handful of stores. in the mall. And when she came home, I said, "How are you?" I was working, and my wife went to pick her up because the mall security called us. She came home. My wife said, "How are you?" She walked in. I said, "How are you?" Gave her a hug. I said, "I'm just gonna finish up, and I'll be in. Let's meet in our bedroom, the main bedroom, in a little bit." And then we sat in there, and I didn't have a lot of lectures. I let her know that stealing wasn't going to be allowed. I would have been okay if the mall security called the police on her. They didn't because she showed some accountability and awareness, which is also fine. And again, I let her know it's kind of like I said with drug testing. Like, drug testing won't perfectly catch every violation of that boundary, but you'll get caught, especially if you're using compulsively. And so I don't know if you need to call the cops to teach them the lesson. That'll probably get known. What you're doing with the school and sending the t-shirts back, I think you're doing great natural consequences. But the end is what I said to my daughters. I said, I can't stop you from stealing, no matter how strict my consequence is to this behavior. No matter how long I ground you, or prevent you from hanging out with certain friends, or not take you to the mall. No matter how long I do it, at some point you're not going to be grounded. At some point you're going to be with your friends. At some point you're going to be back in a mall, and you know where people that steal end up, and that'll be your choice. And I'll visit you when you're in juvenile detention. I didn't say that, but that's the energy. Like, I'll visit you. I'll love you. I'll write you letters. I'll come during family day while you're incarcerated. That sounds almost like I'm joking. I'm not joking. I'm not being trite with this. I mean, it's like the energy is, I can't stop you. I gave her some basic consequences that I thought were really logically related. I let all the friends that she'd been hanging around with at the mall know that she was doing it. Let their parents know, because I realized real quickly that they were all doing it. There was some time where she was grounded. After her grounding, there was, more supervision. The point is, though, not what I did, but that I realized that you can't fix a drug addict. You can't fix somebody who compulsively steals. There's no magic bullet. You already sound like you get so much of the work. You really, really do. But you can't stop them from stealing. You can respond. I would actually use your question as an example to other parents about how to handle it. And then I think you turn it over to him by detaching yourself from it. So when you hear someone say this is what Brad would tell you to do, or Brad would tell you, nice job, most of it's just, you have to do what you have to do. Because you're experimenting too with your life. You're trying to figure out who you are. And I know you're older than your kids, and you have more gray hairs, and you have wrinkles. You might be losing your hair like I am, but it's still your life, and you get to do it. And if I'm your therapist or your trusted friend, I'll ask you questions and see if there's something that you're not seeing or feeling. But I think you get it all. If I could, again, this is a strong thing to say, and we don't have a relationship, but you're asking, and so I think this is what you're looking for. There's just a tiny bit in there, like, you can do it. You can figure it out. There's some magic formula that if you follow, you can fix your kid, and you can't. And pulling back, taking a wider angle lens, speaking to all the folks that are listening to this. That's the issue, right? That's the issue, or the problem, is that we think we can control somebody else, especially our children. And so ironically, or paradoxically, to be more accurate, paradoxically, when you accept that you can't control them is when your influence increases. And when you try to control them is when your influence decreases typically. So if there were any flaw in your question, it would be this slight energy that I feel from the question that suggests that you think that you can figure this out and that you can do it perfectly right. And if you do it perfectly right, or really, really well, if not perfectly, that you'll solve the equation, but it's not yours to solve. And that's not me abdicating parental responsibility and telling you to be laissez-faire. Like some people hear me going back and forth on that. It's just a different way of thinking about the dilemma, thinking about the child, thinking about the relationship, thinking about who you are and your role in the world as a parent. Thanks for the question. Tough one. Mostly because you already have so many insights and so many tools, and he's still being himself. And is there something neurologically going on there? That'd be the only other thing to assess. Is there some kind of learning difference, some atypical neurology that's doing it, that's contributing to it? I mean, those would be my other questions. But aside from those, you're 98% there. Somebody writes, brain spotting. I'm dubious, and what I read doesn't imbue confidence. In fact, it doesn't even make sense. I read an Evoke blog on it that wasn't even coherent thoughts. I read the book. I don't know if you've listened to my podcast, The Person Who Asked This Question. I did a podcast on it a while back. And I don't know if you listened to that, but I don't do brain spotting. I don't intend to get trained in brain spotting. We have some therapists that do it. The fact, people ask me about EMDR. I don't do that either. I don't. When people ask me about going to EMDR, I say evidence suggests that it's very effective for some people. So, it's just about finding a gaze where you feel safe. We do it already. That's one of the things when I've talked to my therapist about it, who I think is the biggest expert on the therapeutic process that I know. When I ask her about it, she's like, we already do that. We already look down, look up, look into somebody's eyes, look off in the distance. And those are all kind of ways we either are showing evidence of us feeling dysregulated or finding regulation. And what I like about brain spotting compared to some of the other trauma techniques is that it relies on a lot of attunement, a lot of attachment-based therapy ideas, which is you've got to follow the lead of the client. So I don't do it. I've never received it. I don't go to process my trauma using it. If it works, great. Just like EMDR and other techniques, other theories like ACT, DBT, CBT, all the techniques and the theories out there. If they work, great. I mean, I'm pretty practical and pragmatic about it. 12 steps. People say to me, I was unfaithful to my partner. Do I need to accept that I'm a sex addict, go to a sex and love addiction group? And I say, you don't have to. Some people swear by it. Some people have tried everything else. Some people have tried to get sober from alcohol using cognitive behavioral therapy and it hasn't worked. Others have. So I don't think you have to accept it. I don't even think you have to try it. I don't even think you have to like it. And I think you're totally allowed to be dubious of it. It's just another way that works for some people. I don't do it as a participant or a practitioner, but I have people that do, and I have people that have sworn by some of the stories that are told sometimes in some of the fixing theories, the fixing techniques that are out there. Sometimes they're too perfect. In the book by David Grand, the woman that was ice skating. I think there was a story in the beginning about a woman ice skating and she couldn't do a certain difficult trick, and she was able to do through brain spotting, track it back to a trauma, and everything got clear. I mean, it's a fine story if it works. It seems a little bit too perfect for me, but I don't dismiss the whole idea of it. So I would just say there's some evidence to suggest that it works for some people. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. And thank you, Malia, for posting the brain spotting podcast link. Of all the ones that therapists, of all the theories, all the books that the therapists have asked me to read and then to present to you all through this medium, I liked that book better than most. I liked that technique better than most because it wasn't so dogmatic. It wasn't all things to all people. And I really love that about him. I love the fact that he was basing a lot of it on attunement also. My young adult son, someone writes, often becomes angry, verbally abusive, and destructive after sessions with his therapist. I think he gets triggered because the therapist is challenging his thinking and pushing him out of his comfort zone. But when he verbally abuses me and destroys my property, I will not allow him to continue to live with me. Fair enough. He's been to wilderness and residential treatment center. I'm at a loss as to what the next steps might be to help him deal with the negative emotions that lead to his untenable behaviors. I think you are on the verge of knowing it, which is it might be not being allowed to live with you. He's a young adult. And again, you get to decide that. And I'm not telling you to do that. And I don't think that that's the solution, but it might be something you need to do to take care of yourself. And so getting divorced isn't the answer, like I was describing a little bit ago, and staying married isn't the answer. Neither one of those are the solutions because those are not the problems. The problem is our own work, our own dilemmas. But those decisions might come out of your work. Does that make sense? I wouldn't tell you to kick your young adult son out of the house. I don't think that's the solution. I don't think letting him stay there is the solution. But I know your healing and growth and evolution and enlightenment is the solution. And out of that work will come the decision. Does that make sense? It comes out of your work, out of your awareness, out of your increased ability to see and to hear. So, I'm inclined to really like the idea of you not wanting him to live with you because you don't want him to live with you. There's one thing in there that you said that I'm suspicious of. If a therapist is challenging somebody and triggering them, that's not really I don't necessarily believe that's good therapy. I think therapy should be a safe place. Therapy should be a place where we are soothed. And so if the therapist is simply pushing somebody outside of their comfort zone to the point of dysregulation so they're not regulated when they come home, it might be a bad therapeutic experience for your child, a bad therapy experience for your child. Yes, we challenge people. We ask difficult questions. We listen to difficult stories. But therapy should be safe. Therapy should be a place where, of all the places where you can do it wrong, right? And it's okay, and you're okay. My first thought before you said that the part about where you think his therapist might be pushing him outside of his comfort zone, I was thinking maybe the therapist is creating a safe place for him where he's allowed to feel and think and be anger and get in touch with it, so that when he comes home, that anger is there toward you, right? It's kind of been unearthed, if you will, because he just sat in a comfortable place. When I go to therapy and I feel anger or hurt or frustration or sadness, I might walk out of and my therapist hears it and holds it well for me. I might come out of that with some things to say to the people in my life for sure. But if I'm making people feel unsafe, if I'm being cruel or violent or aggressive to people, that's a problem. But I did think most of my life, most of my life, I thought therapy was kicking people in the butt therapeutically, giving them a swift kick, challenging them and pushing them. And while that's one tiny thing that I do, more important than all that is I want to give a person at any age an experience of non-judgment, of compassion, of understanding, of emotional safety. So there's a few ideas in there that kind of that come up for me when you say it. Um, Looks like I'm out of time. I'll answer one more question because I started late, and then we can wrap up. Somebody writes, "How do you know when you have outgrown your therapist so that the relationship no longer feels therapeutic?" I was asked by a therapist of 2 years, "What else do you need to feel safe and not judged in our sessions?" In response to me expressing that I still struggle with sharing the more vulnerable stuff and still feel like I might be judged. Does the fact that he needs to ask tell me that it's time to move on? Uh, I think so. If my therapist, if a client said to me, I don't feel safe to share everything, first of all, I would relate to them. Second of all, I would ask if they've ever felt that before in their life. I would, after 2 years, I'd probably know that that they had some experience with not feeling safe in the past. But most importantly, I would thank them for telling me, and I would ask them to tell me more. It's not like he or she is saying to you, "Well, you shouldn't feel that way," but it's kind of in there. I wrote a journal article for the NatSap Journal called "Psychology versus Therapy." Malia can put up the link here. I'd encourage you to read that. I also wrote a blog called "What to Look For in a Therapist." I'm putting a lot of tasks on I called her Melanie. Did I call you Melanie again? I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, Malia. Malia's wonderful, and I sometimes misname her from somebody that used to work here. Malia will share the links for the journal article, and Malia will share the link for the blog. Or you can Google them. Psychology versus therapy, Brad Reedy, or what to look for in a therapist, Brad Reedy, and you can find them both. Therapy is supposed to be different. Therapy is not a coach kicking your butt. That's easy. Takes no talent. Takes very little intelligence. Our parents and our spouses, our friends can do that to us. Therapy should be fundamentally different. And so when you tell your therapist that you don't feel safe, it's kind of the moment of truth to see if they can respond with gratitude. The sheet that I use, this is the one that I use. I'm going to pull it up real quick. If I have it. If I don't have it, I won't pull it up. I don't have it. The safe versus the unsafe list that I created a while ago. Safe responses versus unsafe. Things like, thank you for telling me. I'm glad you're telling me. I'm so sorry. And the question, what do I need to do to make you feel safe? I think that just sounds unskilled at least, and shaming at most. So if you can't talk to your therapist and you don't feel welcomed or received, and that sounds like the way that you're feeling, it might be time to move on. All right. Thanks for being patient with me this evening, for going over and starting late. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are available on Amazon or Audible. I read The Audacity to Be You. We have support groups for current and alumni wilderness parents and families. The next one is January 6th. That's in 2 days at 6:30 p.m. We also have an alumni-only parent wilderness meeting once a month at the end of the month. January 25th at 6:30 p.m. is that date. For intensives alumni, January 11th is our next meeting. Malia at evoketherapy.com is the place to go to email to get more questions. We still have some space. I think we have one space in our in-person January Finding You, and we have a couple of spaces in our online Finding You. And then we have a returning to you that I will be announcing soon. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, the intensives are the place to go. We have therapy. We have attachment-based therapists who do coaching, parent coaching, family coaching, life coaching, relationship coaching. Just contact coaching@evoketherapy.com to find out more. We have pursuits programs for families and for young adults. Think Therapy Light. These can be 3 days for a family. These could be 30 days. My son did one in the Dominican Republic a few years ago for 30 days and still talks about it as being one of the most impactful experiences of his life. We ask all current parents to attend, to try out, to experiment with 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Adult Children, or refugerecovery.org is also a place to go to get support, or NAMI.org to get free classes and support in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. Just go to your podcast app and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast, or go to soundcloud.com and do that same search. You can find Evoke Therapy or myself, Brad, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also find the Evoke Intensive program on Instagram using @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. We also have a blog that is wonderfully curated by Malia, who does a great job of writing and editing and managing assignments for people to complete. I'm going to be doing, by your request, I'm going to be doing a book review of the book What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. I'm halfway through it already. I'm going to be doing that on January 11th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I think it's a great introduction to becoming trauma informed, understanding how the brain works. I think it's going to be a nice resource for people. They just did a really good job of starting at the beginning and explaining it to people who have no experience in this. For some of you, it would be beneath you, but I'm starting the review now. I'll just do it next week on January 11th. January 18th, I'll also be doing a Q&A. At any rate, thank you, folks. Thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. For and in behalf of the people that love you and that you love, thank you for being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.